Now
This
I'm going to,
conference will now be recorded.
all right, that's what I
There you
needed.
go.
Now we are ready to go. Well, hello everyone. So glad you
Hey.
could join us. We've got about 18, 20 people, 27 registered. Maybe some other folks will pop in. You should be able to see on your screen right now, as we've tested, the first slide of my PowerPoint presentation, that right in the heart of it is the title of today's presentation, Case Logic, Service Delivery, and Evaluation of Performance. During the presentation today, I'm going to ask you please to mute your phones, and I will open it up for questions here and there, which I would prefer to take verbally at a couple of different points during the presentation today. So that would be the time when you would unmute, and then please mute back again. And otherwise, you have on your icons and your screen a little chat box that you can send me stuff, and I can read it, and to the extent that I can respond, I will. So welcome aboard. This presentation today is one in a series of presentations we're doing through the Louisiana Prisoner Reentry Initiative Steering Team Association, LA-PRISTA. As many of you know, it's a project of Social Works Institute. It's funded by the Huey and Angelina Wilson Foundation, one of the most prolific sponsors of reentry improvements in the state of Louisiana, and also the Mellencamp Rimes Law Firm and the Boo Grigsby Foundation. And that is probably the best name of a foundation I've ever seen. The LA-PRISTA's mission is to promote high-fidelity implementation of the LA-PRI framework through the convening of stakeholders and delivery of TA training and resources and tools, and this is an example of that. For those of you that have joined other webinars that we've had, you know that we each time show you the four-phase LA-PRI development process, and for those of you that have seen it before, you'll suffer through a little redundancy in the beginning here, but we're joined by several people who've never attended, so we'll do a little bit of housekeeping, if you will. So each one of these four phases has 4 steps, and you can read them on the screen as well as I can read them to you. Most of you that are representing parishes today, and we have probably 9 or 10 parishes represented, have already signed a memorandum of understanding that lays out what's expected from the Department of Corrections and the nonprofit that I work for, the Center for Justice Innovation, which is a partner of LA-PRISTA, also funded by the Wilson Foundation and others. United Way of Southeast Louisiana provides some of our funding, as does the Louisiana Commission on Law Enforcement, the Kabakoff Family Foundation, Baptist Community Ministries, the Greater New Orleans Foundation, and others. The second phase, which most of you have already put into place here, that you have a steering team formed or almost formed. You certainly have your co-chairs in place. You may have had your 4 committees formed, and you've received training on roles and responsibilities, and you are either developed or are developing funding for your community coordinator. You all know without a community coordinator in place, it's really hard to do this work, and so we're putting a premium on helping you raise those funds to get that community coordinator. We're actively working with the Department of Public Safety and Corrections now, of course, one of our enormous partners here for the past 4.5 years, to see if they've got some funding available perhaps to get some of the community coordinators in place. So that's in progress now. For those of you that are in phase 3, regardless of whether you have a community coordinator in place and regardless of whether you've done a community assessment or not, we're doing work on comprehensive community reentry development, because the request for proposals for the community incentive grant for the use of justice reinvestment funds is now active. This seminar is very purposely devoted to helping you complete that, but doing that in a way which is consistent with the type of comprehensive planning that you've been acquainted with and are being trained on. They work in sync, side by side. I'll show you a slide about that in a moment. What we're looking forward to is the fourth phase, implementing the LA-PRI framework with fidelity in delivering evidence-based services by targeting moderate to high risk and need former prisoners and prisoners, and then tracking performance and demonstrating a reduction in recidivism. So obviously, as you can see here, this fourth phase is very, very pertinent to what we're talking about today, and that is around metrics and case service delivery and using evidence-based practices to help us implement. If we do not do the work of implementation with fidelity, we will not be able to show good performance. The Community Incentive Grant request for proposals has been communicated by the Department of Public Safety and Corrections of having 7 kind of core criteria for funding projects. Obviously, we're all about this. Specific measurable changes in organizations and participants, alignment with local and state goals, and addressing, of course, the needs of moderate, high risk, and high needs former prisoners, and making the point that this is a priority population, not an exclusive population. But if we're to prove that we're reducing recidivism, that is additional criminal activity by former prisoners, we obviously have to focus on those prisoners that are most likely to recidivate. That would be the moderate to the high risk of recidivating. Those that are lower risk, particularly lower risk, higher need, they have a place in the priority system, because if we don't serve some of them at some point, their risk level will go up. And so we're working over the course of, I would say, the next 5 to 10 years in Louisiana to make certain we move from high priorities to lower priority populations. Continuing here, the incentive grant is very clear. We're to work collaboratively with community partners. Many of you have chosen or are about to choose an intermediate organization, the subject of our first training some weeks ago. Very important to have an organization that can go beyond acting as your fiduciary and help you manage the funds, but actually provide incentives, capability for training and coordination and collaboration, and help you raise other dollars to be able to fill in those gaps. And they are very clear that we know that ultimately we have to be able to show proof of concept and success at reducing recidivism so that they can be sustained without DPSC or state funding, which I don't know when it will ever happen that we don't receive any funding, but it's always tentative year to year. And with justice reinvestment, we are blessed this year with having a decent level of funding to compete for, or if others would say, collaborate so we each get a fair share of the pie. And know that too, in the comprehensive planning process that we have heralded, that many of you had a lot of input on in terms of how we develop the comprehensive community reentry planning document, it puts a premium on blended funding, because we know regardless of the level of state funding, it just isn't going to be enough. If you develop a good comprehensive community reentry plan and it has some level of state funding, it opens the door very wide for blended funding from other sources, including perhaps other state sources, federal sources, philanthropic sources, et cetera, and private donations from individuals. So blended funding streams, the premium. Also, we're looking at replication. We want to make sure that if folks are doing what we're doing that's working, that others can do it and get similar results. That's why we have to document everything, and evidence-based practices documenting both process and impact. We're going to get into a lot of detail about that today. And of course, the 7th core principle that the department is recognizing is the use of evidence-based practices and strategies that offer clear results. So that by way of background. So clearly, what the department will be deciding in terms of scoring around these applications, we're in good shape to be able to score high, particularly if we're collaborative and we meet those 7 core items. And over the 6-week period, we had put together different of these virtual workshops around the comprehensive community reentry plan, because various components of that comprehensive plan tie directly to the requirements of the RFP. And unlike the RFP, the comprehensive plan is particularly descriptive and helpful, we think, in what you need to write and how you need to write it. And so we're training on both of these approaches simultaneous, and we hope it's helpful to you. The past several weeks, as you know, if you've joined us before, we've asked you to focus on assets, barriers, and gaps around what we call 6 core areas, our highest priority areas for services: housing, employment, education, behavioral health, with most of you have already got functioning committees around those 4 areas, assessing assets, barriers, and gaps to the extent that you've been doing that work. It's a cut and paste, really, to take what you've learned and plug it into your application, into your comprehensive plan. And at your urging, we've added 2 other service areas that are critical, we know, for the success, particularly immediately upon release. That is around legal services and family reunification. And thank you for helping us determine that we need 6 core areas, not 4. We've also asked you in the last virtual seminar that Vonnie and Caitlin Canfield from Louisiana Public Health Institute prepared for you, is to obviously target moderate to high risk, high need former prisoners, as the RFP requires, to a pretty clear extent. There's a little confusion in the RFP about that. We'll see what they clarify when they answer our questions in the next couple of weeks, because we did ask that question. They seem to allow the targeting of low risk people who are high need. Maybe they do, but we're not recommending that at this time. So this week, we're going to be focusing on recommendations and expectations for service delivery, case logic, and evaluation and performance. So any questions so far? If you want to unmute and ask questions or write me about anything I've said so far, this is kind of background and a bit redundant to our other sessions. Hearing none. This is a recap of corollaries between the request for proposal and the comprehensive plan. You can see in the yellow what we're focusing on today. You should have in front of you, as we've sent out to you last evening, and if you've joined these before, you've received this multiple times, the RFP itself and the comprehensive community reentry plan document. We'll be flashing on those today. It's a little difficult to flash on these documents as I sit here and manage this work. So to the degree you've got those documents in front of you and can access them, it will be helpful for you. The weeks that we've been focusing on this virtual training included, as I mentioned, training in early July in the intermediate organizational role. Last session on targeting of high-risk prisoners, and today then looking at approaches for service delivery and then performance and metrics. We're expecting, if you're following this schedule at all, and many of you we think are, we hope you are, that you'll be ready to start thinking about budget this coming week and begin to finish up. You're probably writing your proposal piece by piece. We know that the responses to written questions that many of us have put in are due August 9th, so that will help us as we get to the point of writing. And I want to urge you to attend in person on August 14th, a statewide comprehensive community reentry training that we're going to have in Baton Rouge at a location to be determined. It will be virtual as well. It will run the same time as this one is, that is 1:30 to 3:30 or 4 o'clock. We will have a room enough for each of the parishes to have a table You may only have one person there. If you're feeling lonely, we'll hook you up with somebody else. But this is going to be an opportunity that's unique in our short history of developing this stuff, because you're going to have the ability to interact with each other. It's going to be a work-oriented session. And of course, it will be interactive with the RFP as well. And since the RFP requires your proposals to be due on the 23rd, you'll be pretty close perhaps to having that done. So that's a signal to what's coming up. So I'm going to start now digging into the focus of this week's work around service delivery, case logic, and evaluation. And if you've got your comprehensive plan there and your RFP there, then you can see the corollaries between the two documents. The RFP section 1.9.5 on page 13 is called the approach to the scope of work. I'm going to flash that document up in a moment. And it correlates then with part 2 of your comprehensive planning document, which you received again last evening if you had been signed up. And it correlates there with section A on page 7 and section B on page 8. And so if you have those two documents in front of you, you'll be able to look back and forth between them. The quotes here are taken right from the RFP itself, and they kind of lay out there what's expected here, what would be covered. And you've got to describe how justice-involved individuals, in this case, former prisoners returning, will be engaged throughout the process from the point of initial contact through closeout. That touches on the issue of service delivery and case logic. That is, how do we make sense out of working on these cases? How do we move from the point of contact when they're moved to a reentry center near one of the 5 tier 1 parishes, and we work with them then, and then we begin to do prison in-reach, and we bring human services into them, and we start to develop the reentry accountability plan. That's service delivery and case logic. And interestingly, the RFP says that you're restricted to work with people for no more than 6 months from release with services, with no more than 20% of pre-release. And I don't know where this came from. I don't know that it's particularly evidence-based. In fact, I don't think it is, except from the standpoint that we know the research tells us that we have to front load resources. People begin to fail almost immediately upon release. And the idea that we work with them immediately prior to release and that release is evidence-based, but the idea that we'd cut them off after 6 months is not evidence-based. And I urge you to make the case to make certain that we can continue to work for people. We're tracking recidivism for up to 5 years, and people fail and return to prison increasingly within the first 3 years. And so if we cut off services after 6 months and they're left to their own or left to just go through public services, then there's going to be a challenge with that. So I urge you to question that and to formulate ways that you can use evidence-based practices convincingly to be able to make that point. And obviously the RFP requires you, I should say, to create a plan to document the services provided to each participant, how progress will be monitored, and says we're going to be touching on a great deal of documentation that's already been developed for that. You don't have to start from scratch with that. If you're not on mute, please put yourself on mute. I'm hearing a little bit of background noise here. And so one of today's goals is to make certain that you've got access to the various documents that you can use to respond to these types of requirements in the RFP. In the scope of the approach to the scope, I'm going to see if I can get myself a document up here. And it is the RFP. Let's see here. That looks a little weird. Oh, mercy. It worked a minute ago. So can you see the approach and methodology document partly on your screen?
Yes,
But you can't see the full page, correct? You see a bunch of noise at the top.
that's correct.
I'm wondering why that is. Let's see what I have to do. Well, y'all, I'm
It
in a
looks
little.
like a Word document.
It is a Word document, and when I showed it earlier on the screen, it showed the entire document. I'm going to have to look at this just a second. I apologize for this technical challenge here.
On the bottom right corner, there should be an icon that you can press.
Yeah, I don't see that. I'm sorry. Anybody with any help, unmute and give me some advice here. When I tested this, I did not have this problem. Let me go back. Well, I'll tell you what, y'all. I don't want to delay this. Let me go back to this. And y'all should be looking at your RFP document. You should be looking at page 12. And it's very clear about what's expected here, which I flashed on that other slide about describing how justice engaged individuals are working with you and how you're going to provide services. So there's 3 documents that we need to be looking at. One is the case logic model. I'm going to show you this in a minute. This illustrates what's expected from the point of imprisonment during phase 1 through the point of pre-release in phase 2, and then when prison in-reach occurs, and then through community supervision. The second document that you've received, and I'm going to try to flash on that momentarily, is a document that describes collaborative case supervision and management, which describes in narrative fashion how we're expected to work with people from the point of imprisonment through the point of discharge. And we're urging you in your application to describe, reference, and attach those documents in your application. First, we're going to look at the case logic model, and I'm going to attempt again to try to get this document up on the screen here. And I hope that I don't have that problem I had a moment ago, because if I do, it's going to be hard to see it. So you see the document there, correct? And number 1, it says assess risk. Everyone see that?
Yes.
Okay, so good. So this document has got 3 different phases to it. You see in the center here, it says phase 1, the institutional phase. I'm going to walk you through this document, and it's important for you to understand it, and to the degree, some of you have already received training on it, some of you have not. We will not be able to go into a lot of depth today. This usually is an 1.5 to 2 hour training itself, but I want you to be familiar with it. And the first thing I'm going to show you is what the document expects across the board in terms of all 3 phases. And there are 12 steps in this document. The first that you're familiar with is the evidence-based approach of assessing risk. And you'll see in the case logic model that while people are in prison, this is the first phase of the ReEntry initiative, that while they're in prison, they're having, as expected, the administration of the risk tool, the Tiger, the static 99 for sex offenders. And you can see that if they are in fact special needs or medium to high risk or longer term low risk, that they are in fact want to be bona fide for services under the LA-PRI pre-release. And so the second part of the case logic begins, which is to assess need and their responsivity. And then you can see here what assessing their reentry needs engenders, and then they use secondary assessments, as you can see here. And at the bottom of the screen in your document, you should have this in front of you. There should be in the phase 1 a default for low need, lower risk prisoners, so that the Department of Corrections is not burning up a lot of resources on people that are less likely to receive. And then we move through the third step of the case logic under phase 1, the institutional phase here. You see that, and that is to develop the institutional reentry accountability plan, or the REAP. And it's intended there for the prison staff to create a document here. That's what this document, this little coding here with this rectangle with these little stripes on the side, means it's a document. Develop the institutional REAP, what we call the first REAP. We assess their risk of being raped in prison. We do a psych assessment, and then as a result of doing that assessment now of risk and need and developing the REAP, we're moved into the fourth point of the institutional phase, the delivery of programs. And you'll see here in this part of it that the development of the REAP, the delivery of the programs, the measuring of individual progress is shown here as a cycle. So we write the REAP, we apply the implementation of it, we measure progress, it's revised, we see how they do. If they do well or not well, it's assessed. We go through the cycle for as long as they're in prison. If they're not in the track of high likelihood, moderate to high likelihood of recidivating, the model again expects there to be a default for low risk, low need. This is an expectation, it's not a fact. And so it is an aspirational expectation. Then moving along, as that measurement is defined, people move through the cycle, and that is the first phase. That happens before the communities have access to these individuals. What we want to know is, when we're working on our development of the next phase of the reentry plan, what did the first one look like? Show it to us, send it to us. Let's know what happened. How did they do? Who visited them? What were their setbacks? What were their issues? This is aspirational as well. This has not been tested out. We'll see whether or not it happens as we begin implementation. And so you see there the second phase, or I'm sorry, the first phase. Now the second phase is around pre-release. And you know that what I just showed you is the first 5 steps. Here I'm showing up on the screen the next 4 steps, obviously 6, 7, 8, and 9. And this is now prior to release. And it's at this point during this phase that you will be introduced to the moderate high risk of recidivating individuals who we are reliant on the Department of Corrections to identify and provide us detail on that. So when you're describing service delivery, be clear through the use of this case logic model, describing it, attaching it, referencing it, that that is their responsibility and you expect it to happen. When folks are moved into that pre-release stage, it's expected that their risk of reentry is reviewed again, unless, of course, it was just recently done. Some states have a separate reentry risk. This state does not through the Tiger as of yet. But this is what happens during this pre-release stage. A re-administering of the Tiger, again, making certain that if they are medium to high risk of recidivating, they move on through the cycle. And if they are low risk, oh, what did I do? I don't like the looks of this. If they are low risk, housed in jails, they should be defaulted. We should not see them. We should not have them identified. That is part of what is expected. Then the second REAP is started to be administered through that assessment of need or the re-administration of it. This is what we saw before, but now it's done again if it has been some time. Again, the secondary assessments. Again, similar to phase one, the development of the next reentry accountability plan. Similar to that first phase, we're now pre-release, seeing that cycle, right? Developing the REAP, delivering the programs, measuring individual performance. And then we see that cycle. If you aren't on mute, please mute. I'm getting a lot of background noise, which I'm sure other people can hear. Thank you for that. And you'll see then that this circular cycle, just like in the phase one, continues. We want to know how folks are doing during that pre-release stage. We should be able to have documentation from the state. That's what we expect. In your description of service delivery, say that. That's what we expect from the Department of Corrections. It's at this point in time when we begin to do prison inreach, and during this pre-release stage, I got it right here, where we have assessed their risk and need. We're writing that second reentry plan. The release authority has told us if there's conditions that they need to meet prior to release. If they're on parole, we'll see those. If they're not on parole, we should have some expectations prior to release of what the Department of Corrections expects. That is written into that second reentry plan. And then we begin the development of the third REAP. And this is where we link to the service providers. This is the most important change between what has been done in the past and what's going to be done now. You are going to have access to these people in a location within 45 minutes to an hour from their home of return, their community of return, so that you can link with them. Service providers can link with them, be enrolled, pre-enrolled, etc. That's what you describe in your service delivery, having access to them being identified by the Department of Corrections for you. If you're sophisticated in terms of what we've been working on in pipeline data, you know what pipeline 2 is. Who are the people that are in prison getting out? This is pipeline 3. Who do we have that you want us to meet? What have they done while they're in prison? What are the results of their Tiger risk need assessment? Tell us what we have. Tell us what you know. Introduce us to this person. Make sure they understand what they've signed up for. Make sure they're enthusiastic. And when we meet them, let's make sure they don't say, "Who are you? I don't know what you're talking about. I didn't sign up." Let's make sure that we're clear. You need to describe that as a responsibility of the Department of Corrections as defined in this case logic model, which I will show you later is part of the Department of Corrections policy on reentry. So your expectations are sound in this regard. So now we are completing this second phase. I'm going to jump down to the third phase, which is called the community phase. And once again, you see at the top these 12 steps. I'm going to walk through them. And here now we're going to continue the development of the REAP 3. You started it while they were behind bars at the reentry center, identified by the DOC, you begin the development of their reentry plan with parole, who should be at your side as you're developing this RFP and describing that, because they, of course, are your essential partners. And it's during this time that we are beginning now to finalize that REAP and beginning to implement the reentry plan, because now they're on the street and you're going to have a document that will be shared broadly, internal and external, the reentry accountability plan, third version. And then similarly, you have the cycle of service delivery. This looks a little crazy. I know, these arrows, oh my God, it looks like we're in a traffic jam and we don't know which way to go. But when you follow the arrows, it's actually pretty easy to follow. We provide supervision. They get a felony arrest. It may result in a technical violation. It may result in a new felony conviction. If it does, it will result in a parole revocation. And what happens then is that they're closed out and they go back to prison. And this arrow here goes all the way back and it starts over again. We want to reduce the likelihood that that happens. If it does, there is a closing summary required by the department. But if there is a new arrest that results in a violation, then it moves back up here. Supervision continues, and the cycle can continue with violations. People are expected to violate their parole or the results of their community supervision. The question is, how serious is it? How serious is it compared to responses that are returning to prison or increasing supervision, increasing the types of treatment that they receive? And here you see that we are implementing the REAP and monitoring its progress. This is explicit as a way to describe in your application what's expected, how you will monitor, and I'm going to show you later in the slides how we can work with a research partner to make sure that all of this is captured in a comprehensive evaluation approach. We move toward discharge. As you know, here, there is a discharge report that we expect to take place. We have something in the model called a reentry accountability plan for when they're off discharge, and it's just community partners now supervising the case. We have no forward motion on that. We expect to be able to deal with that in future years. Here's an important point to finish out this, and I'm going to ask you for verbal questions in a moment so you can prepare to unmute. If you'd like, here we see what we expect as a result of these 11 steps of the case logic models. These are the outcomes that are clearly defined by the Department of Correction, by the LA-PRI state steering team, by the local steering teams in the LA-PRI overarching policy, repeated here in the case logic model, and repeated again as we start to hone in on the specifics of an evaluation. And as I mentioned earlier, there are both process and impact. Things we can count. Risk need assessments are completed. They drive case plans. We've used evidence-based practices. We implement supervision, treatment, and program. We define inmate readiness by having a reentry plan. That's stuff we can count. This is part of our evaluation approach. We consider victims' impact. And then impact outcomes is that we want to show improve harm to individuals and communities is reduced. How do we do that? We improve victim restitution. We reduce convictions. We reduce violations. We reduce returns to prison. And we provide additional services. Obviously, parishes cannot do the process and impact in outcomes without the full participation of the Department of Corrections. Therefore, you will see an evaluation plan responsibilities that we must rely on them for, and you must articulate those in your response to the RFP, because the RFP does not detail any performance expectations except that you will have them, and until you've met your performance expectations, you will not be fully reimbursed. There is a 10% holdback for you to be able to show that you've done your work. And so if we are in fact relying on the Department of Corrections to do some of these evaluation measures, you must say so. This is one of several documents that you should describe, reference, and attach that shows what's expected. We'll get more detail in a moment. That then is the 12-step case logic model. I'm going to leave this up on the screen, go all the way to the first phase, and ask anyone who has any verbal questions for the group to hear to ask those questions about the case logic model, and I'll answer those questions. We'll take a few minutes for that, and then I'll continue. So if you have a question, please unmute and ask your question.
So currently this is still only for Tier 1, correct?
Yes, the expectations are that it is for Tier 1 because Tier 1 is now moving toward implementation. It is, however, the expectation that this is going to take place for Tier 2 as well. As you know, we had promoted very strongly at LA-PRISTA and the Center for Justice Innovation that some of the Tier 2 parishes would receive some funding. We're still hoping to have that happen, but it's clear that through this RFP, as of yet, it hasn't been extended that way. So the short answer to your question is yes for Tier 1s. Other questions?
This is Jules Edwards. So I think you already responded, but just to be clear, we have to state that it is our expectation that the department will send us the closing summary for those folks whose parole has been revoked. And it's also our expectation that they will send us the discharge summary and the REEP-4 for those who are successfully discharged from supervision.
Yes, I will say in general that's correct. I'll expand it though. What you need to say in your application for funds and in your comprehensive plan, if you're not applying for funds, because you, Judge, in a Tier 2 should be developing your comprehensive plan as we've discussed. You need to describe there all of these things that the Department of Corrections is expected, not just those documents, but actually implementing this because this is what they have agreed to do. And rather than sending you the information, we would hope that they will provide you access to the information so that in the year 2018, we're not relying on people sending us via email these documents, but we have the capability to go to a firewalled site to be able to look at the information. And these are expectations that, as far as I know, and I'm pretty close to this, they have not yet been developed. And for Tier 1 parishes that are heading toward implementation, one would expect them to be developed by the time your contracts are cut. Your contracts are cut. So it's incumbent on you to describe in your application or if in your comprehensive plan that that's what you expect and that you cannot perform without the department performing. Does that make sense? Hearing nothing, I assume. Thank you. And other questions? All right, hearing none. Let me go back to the PowerPoint. This is what I just described to you. And now I'm going to move to the next document that you should have in front of you. This is a narrative document. It's the Collaborative Case Supervision and Management Model Description. It describes a 6-step process for working with clients through a collaborative process. And again, this is why it's important to have DPSC partners in the table as you're developing your comprehensive plan and your RFP, because they will help you understand and help work with you to make certain that there's clarity around what's expected from them. And this document then refers to the reentry accountability plan, which we have in draft form being used in St. Tammany, our first site where we're testing out the model very slowly, not with a lot of real production as of yet. But we know that by the time your grants are awarded, we have to have a reentry accountability plan that's ready to go. I'm going to attempt to show you the document. I'm a little fearful that the document isn't going to show up the way I want it to. Let me see if I can find it. It's right there. Yeah, it's doing the same damn thing. I don't know. I don't know why. I don't know why this is doing this. No, this is, oh Lord. This is a, I'm sorry, this is a problem, y'all. I can't seem to get this thing centered on the screen. I don't know why, and I don't want to take the time to fix it. And that's too bad, because I've got it highlighted and ready to show you, but I have a technical problem here that I didn't have when I tested it out, so I'm not sure why this is happening. Maybe I'll be able to solve it in a second. But anyway, this collaborative case management document, I can show you here. This is a little frustrating. I can show you what's on the left side of the page on your screen. If you got it in front of you, you can follow it. It talks about the goal being behavior change. It talks about returning offenders being partner in the process. And then throughout the document, it describes what's expected through consistent with the case logic model, 6 steps in the process, conducting the assessment. You can see a little bit of that document. Developing the reentry accountability plan, implementing it through the REEntry process, providing the services and the needs. And along the left column of this document, you see references to the research that shows you the evidence-based practices. Remember that your RFP scores you better if you're referring to evidence-based practices, and we urge you to cite these documents that are laid out here. It's all been done. You've got access to these documents. If you don't have them because you didn't go through the training, or you got them and you can't find them, ask us again. We'll send them to you. But these documents, again, should be referenced and cited and attached. And I'm going to try one more thing here. I don't know why. Well, I apologize. By the time we get done with this, I'll be better at it. Let me just go back to the slide. That collaborative case supervision and management model, again, it's a narrative form, and it's provided to you as a Word document, so you can cut and paste it. You can describe it in detail. Strangely, oddly, the RFP apparently doesn't have a restriction on the number of pages. I pity the poor reviewers. Tristy can acknowledge how important it is to restrict the number of pages people send. People like me would send Tristy, I don't know, a couple hundred pages, which I managed to do anyway through a series of attachments. But I urge you to refer to cut and paste these descriptions in your document. And so that is the final point of this section of the presentation around case management, prison inReach, reacting to that approach to the scope of work. If you've got your scope of work document, you'll look at page 12 and 13, and it's very clear about these things. I showed you on the screen, highlighted here, some of what it says, but you'll also see in the document, which I highlighted for you, but I can't show you apparently because I got this glitch here, different sections of it. But let me pause here, ask you if you have any questions around this section, to please unmute and ask a question for everyone's benefit, and then to mute back and I'll answer the question. Does anyone have any questions or comments at this point? And I will ask you a question because I do want some feedback on this. Is what I've talked about so far making sense? Do these documents seem like they will be helpful? So let me ask you that and see if anyone is willing to unmute and answer those questions for me.
I'll bite the bullet here. Yes, I think that they're going to be very, very helpful. I think just even reiterating the things from the previous meetings at the beginning is really helping it sink in a little bit more for me. And it's aiding a lot in understanding how I need to construct the documents.
Good, good. Would you identify yourself, please?
I'm sorry, this is Georgia from Social Work.
Hey, Georgia, good. Thank you. Anyone else? Does this make sense to folks? I'll call on a couple people. Todd, what do you think?
I'm busted. So I was doing some email, Dennis, but I've been following your slides very carefully. Forgive me for not answering your question.
That's okay. Judge Edwards, they make sense to you, my friend.
Clear the bell. My challenge is the time to make it happen.
Yeah, join the crowd. Join the crowd. Everyone feels the pinch. Everyone feels the pinch. Tell me, Tristy, do these things make sense to you if I can impose on you? Okay, I'm going to go ahead and move on, flash what you've just seen. And now I'm going to begin talking about the details around performance measurement expectations. Now we're going into waters which have been chartered. As I mentioned several times, there are several documents that are clear about what the general expectations around about both process and impact evaluation. And similarly to what I've said so far, it's incumbent on you in your application, in your comprehensive planning document, to articulate what you expect from the Department of Corrections, document why you expect it, describe it, reference it, and attach it. I'm going to describe those documents again. And Tristy writes us and says, sorry, it took her a moment to find her mute button. And yes, she is clear. That's good. Thank you, Tristy. And so here, as we look at, again, the correlation between the RFP and your comp plan. In your RFP, on the left side of your desk, or the right side of your desk if you're left-handed, you should have open section 1.9.5 on page 13, just a little bit than most of it on page 14, the performance measurement plan. And you can see then in the other side of your desk, opening up to the comprehensive community reentry plan, part 4 of the second section of the comp plan. On page 31, there is a section there on performance and evaluation, some of it is already filled out for you, consistent with what you're about to see. And so once again, the comp plan as a way to show you how to document, how to reference these documents, we hope is beneficial. The quote here, though, in italics, is taken right from the RFP itself. I am not going to go back to that document because it's obvious that I can't show it to you very well. But this is what it says. The state expects you to develop a logic model about how you're going to meet your measurable objectives. This case logic model is an example of a logic model and helps you meet your expectations relative to your objectives around what? Reentry accountability planning. About what other objectives? The use of risk and need assessment to drive those case plans. Around what other objectives? Delivering services. To whom and when. You have a logic model to reference and to use, and if you wish to expand on. What are the project milestones that you hope to achieve? What do you hope to achieve through the case logic phase 2? How many people do you hope to work with who have been identified? What are the milestones? Meeting them, working on their REAP, understanding their assessment through the Tiger, pre-enrolling, enrolling them. And we're going to then move into the metrics that we're recommending be documented by the state and by you to track activities, referencing that logic model. And you will see, we hope the lights will go off when you reference the tracking of activity and results in the case logic model. That is step 12. What do you expect to result from the logic model? A listing of process and impact evaluations. Again, this has all been written. You don't have to reconstruct it. You don't start from scratch. Describe this. Reference these documents. Attach them. And then what you propose to report. We have that recommended here. We will show you momentarily. And what do you propose to change in the system and in program participants? That also is documented. The value of this is very, very high because this is very difficult. And again, these are recommendations. We're making them to you and we're making them to the state simultaneous. Obviously, the state's been involved for 2 years in developing these, so we don't expect it to be a hard sell. But what we have to see from the state is it has to be documented. And one way for that documentation to be assured is for you to document your expectations around these things, because again, the RFP says nothing about performance except that you have to achieve it. In the section around performance measurement, at the top of the screen here, you see that I've just simply summarized what you just saw on that previous slide, and we're referencing these various documents. The system blueprint, which I'm going to try to show you, the overarching policy, which I'm going to try to show you. I've already showed you the case logic model, and the point here is that in the system blueprint and in the overarching policy and in the case logic model, the process and impact metrics are defined and documented by the department. Your job is to remind them of that and put that in your application. It's already been defined by them. All you got to do is say, we know it, we believe it, you got to do it, or we can't perform. We know what you're going to do, and based on what you're going to do, we know what we're going to do. And we'll see how this is charted momentarily. We're going to look at, if the document works here, these performance measurement recommendations which was sent to you. So hopefully we'll flash at least maybe just on the left side of that document if this thing is still screwy, but otherwise you've got it in front of you. First of all, the system blueprint, I'm going to try to flash on the document. If you've got it in front of you, this is a one-page landscape document that's got these 4 columns on it across the top: workload factors, strategic direction, work processes and procedures, and performance outcomes. I'm going to attempt to go to that document. Let me see. Let's see if this is any different here. Oh dear, I don't want to do that. Oh boy. What do you all see there? All right.
We still see your main slide.
Okay, well my slide is doing all sorts of screwy stuff here. Move this window away. Okay, now I'm back to that. Let's see here. Boy, I'll tell you, I better not play around with this thing when I'm live. Screen sharing is now paused. Okay, back to the slideshow. Okay, sorry about that technical glitch there. I'm going to try another approach here. If I can get this up on the screen. We did great in practice. We did great in practice. What I'm showing you is the system blueprint that's here. Oh, okay, that's not too bad.
I don't think that system blueprint was in the email you sent us last night.
It was, in fact, yes, it was. And so you'll see here, as I showed on my screen, these workload factors. This is 2014, y'all. This was developed by the Department of Corrections and published. I'm not going to be able to move the damn screen again.
Yeah.
It wasn't in my packet either.
Well, it was in 200 of them. Maybe the last one it wasn't in. If you don't have this, let me know. I'm going to send it to you. Here is the main point of this. If I can get this thing, if I can go over this way. Oh God, I am sorry. I cannot move the damn document over. But the last column of this document, for those of you that have it, it's based on a 2014 decision by the Department of Corrections to focus on metrics and measures. And it's those exact metrics and measures that are in the case logic model. They're exactly the same. So this is another document to refer to attach in terms of what you expect. So Victoria, I think that the last group of you, I did 4 emails yesterday and tried to attach all the documents to 250 people, not just the 27 of you who registered, but all 250 people were invited, which is probably not the best way to fly a plane. I must have missed it. I will send that to you. My apologies, but I will send that document to you. But here's the point, is that this is already part of this documentation. And as we go back to the PowerPoint, these are, in fact, what's listed that you saw in the case logic model and listed in the last column of that system blueprint. These are the process outcomes. I've gone through them. I'm just reiterating them. And again, obviously, they're redundant. This is also in the system blueprint. The same exact impact outcomes in step 12 of the case logic model. It's the same exact wording. That's why you referencing it, attaching it, etc., will remind the department or explain to the department what you expect to happen. The overarching policy of the Department of Corrections You all should have received this in your emailing yesterday. Some of you have received more extensive training on this. Here's the thing to point out about this overarching model, this overarching policy. It references the blueprint. It references the case logic model. It references and appends the collaborative case supervision and management model. By appending it to the policy, these documents are part of that policy. We're waiting, anticipating Secretary LeBlanc to sign that policy before implementation begins. You should say that is expected. You should attach that policy. You should reference it, particularly around what you expect to be able to measure by way of performance. And in spite of the challenges I've had, I don't think I'm going to bother to mess with trying to bring that document up. You should have it in front of you. I apologize again. This is what it says in the policy document, consistent with the process and impact evaluations that I just showed you. This is required by the staff of the Department of Corrections. Obviously, the decrease of felony convictions, repeat crimes by prisoners, former prisoners, violations, revocations, those are data elements that you must rely on the state to provide for you. Your performance measurement plan needs to include what you expect from them. The policy also says, very importantly, that the department is implementing the Louisiana Prisoner Reentry Framework, which includes these intermediate performance measurement, the system blueprint impact measurements, the case logic model impact expectations, in order to inform the state level steering team, the local steering teams. It's all written into the policy. We need it signed. It needs to be implemented. You can describe then this. Now I'm going to try my best to flash on this other document because it's important. You all should have it. It is a list of performance measurement recommendations. It is completely consistent with everything I've said so far, consistent with these other documents that I've mentioned and some of which I've shown you, but it goes into much more detail of the specific data elements that need to be collected, whether those data elements are available, if so, where they are, if not, how are we going to develop them to be able to find them and make sure that they are there. I'm going to try to get to that document. Bear with me. This is the document. Does this look familiar to those of you that got your emails from yesterday?
Yes.
And I am once again, I wonder, does anybody have any idea? Unmute, please, and tell me what I might be able to do to be able to show you this document. I am just beyond frustrated here. I don't know why. Pausing the action, I apologize. I don't know why this is doing this. All right, well, we're going to have to live with it, I guess. I'm wondering if I can even scroll down. I can scroll down.
looking through the
Yeah.
I was
Go
looking
ahead.
through the help stuff to see if I could find an answer for you. Try
Yeah.
unsharing your screen and resharing it.
Okay, let's go there. That didn't work. Let's try something else here. I think you're on to something. Share your screen. Applications. No, that didn't work. Can you see it? Can you see what you saw earlier again now? Is that same document showing again, Tristan?
No.
Not? Oh boy. Why experimentation? How about now?
Yep, it's back up.
Okay, well, I don't know what the glitch is here. This is for offline. Once again, I'll give you the excuse it worked during practice. But anyway, I can show you kind of down the left side of it that what you see in the document, not surprisingly, okay, is those same process measures, but now with some more information about the types of data elements that we're recommending be tracked. All the process measures and all of the impact measures. So they're repeated, but now with more detail that you've not seen before. And this is a result of working with the department over the past 9 months with funding from the Wilson Foundation, as Tristan and I have discussed. Looking forward to the department documenting this and agreeing to all this. And then what I show in the document you should have in front of you for each of these process measures, what the data elements are, whether they're available. If they're available, how do we have access? If they're available, who will track them? And you will see throughout here, as I've highlighted, several of them are the responsibility of local parishes. And what we're indicating here in this part of the screen that you can't see, during the last 9 months with Wilson funding, we have been promoting and had an initial sign off from the department that the Louisiana Public Health Institute would be our research partner. We're recommending they be your research partner so that we're doing one across the board, all 5 parishes, evaluation, looking at these various data elements, many of which are not currently there, many of which are qualitative that we have to create the data elements to track. And we'll be talking in more detail about this at the August 14th training as we follow up with each of the 5 parishes to determine your level of agreement on this idea that we work with one organization to help us with evaluations and then set our sights on raising the dollars to be able to do that. But this stuff is very explicit, and it shows what, if it's not highlighted, it is the department's responsibility, such as indicator 3.1, targeted prisoners have REAPs. So the organization that the Department of Corrections has chosen for their research partner to address their evaluation needs is University of Louisiana at Lafayette. And we expect them at DOC and their research partner to produce this work, agree to this evaluation plan as they already have, but sign off on it. And their responsibility is detailed here is to do some of the stuff we're urging the parishes to sign on to do these other things that are highlighted in yellow. So for example, making certain that restitution through increased employment, making certain that we have a REAP Part 3, making certain that they're implementing them with some fidelity. These are all on the ground expectations of what happens with the parishes and your most prominent partner with your parole community supervision staff, which is why it's so critical to to have them at the table through all of this planning. And it lays out all of this by way of process, and then not surprisingly, also by way of impact. So if it's highlighted, we expect it to happen at the community level because there is a federal grant that has got the University of Louisiana Lafayette involved to look at housing. We're expecting them to be able to do that. That's why it's not highlighted. And then all these other things are highlighted. We expect to be your responsibility. And again, we would love for this to be done one way across the board, a collaborative decision by all 5 parishes to work with Louisiana Public Health Institute. They've already been working with you on Pipeline 1 data, Pipeline 2 data, and at least in one parish down in Orleans Parish, there's been some discussion of working with LPHI there. So this is not this should be a fairly easy thing to consider whether or not we can get all 5 of you to do it and then collaborate on funding to be able to get it done. LA-PRISTA is committed to working with the funders to make certain we've got the money for this parish-based research partnership. We're talking to the partners. Tristy's always at the table with us, of course, extraordinarily helpful as we talk with other funders. United Way of Southeast Louisiana, which provided some historic and some current funding, Greater New Orleans Foundation, Baptist Community Ministries, Prescott Family Foundation, etc. So again, back to this, these are expectations that would be developed in there. You'll see the whole document when you take a look at it, technical violations, etc. And then see if it's going to let me, it doesn't let me go down to the bottom of the page, for God's sake. Restitution payments, and there's also an expectation that the Department of Corrections is going to be doing a full-blown evaluation, an experimental research design to measure the impact over time on recidivism of working under this particular model. We'll expect a lot more detail of that as time goes on. We haven't, the communities haven't, and we don't have access to a lot of detail about that, but we expect that to come forward. I want to go back, if I may, to the PowerPoint screen. Having shown you, the slide is lying. I didn't go to the document. I only went to the left side of it. And so this is what I mentioned already. Data that's the state's responsibility, data that we think is the local responsibility, recommending that we have one approach for the types of partnership we need, and urge you to consider either including funding in your proposal, divided up amongst y'all, which we'll get into some detail following this workshop. And if we have some detail forthcoming from LPHI and or from Orleans Parish, we can learn from what they're decided to do and how that's going to work. But obviously LPHI has been at the table as I've developed these documents. They've signed off on being ready, willing, and able to do it if the funding is achieved. So this concludes this second part of this presentation. Going back to that original slide here, laying it out. I'm going to leave this slide up. I'm going to ask those of you who have question or comment to unmute long enough to ask a question. And for some of you who are willing, answer this question for me. Does this make sense? Does this look like stuff that's going to be useful? How useful? Are you giddy with excitement and enthusiasm that this work has been done? Or are you just mildly impressed? Let me ask you to open your mics and comment, please.
Jules Edwards, I think this information is very helpful. Again, it's a time crunch, but I do have a question. Please tell me again and the different work that Louisiana Public Health Institute is doing versus the ULL at Lafayette? What's that work different?
So when you look at the various process outcome measurements that are detailed in the overarching policy, the case logic model, the system blueprint, here they are, process outcomes, and then impact outcomes. In the document that I just showed you, which you received last night, called Evaluation Plan Recommendations, those that are highlighted are the ones that we're thinking LPHI will address. I don't have them highlighted here. I did not do that, but some of these are under the state's responsibility. Some of these here are under the LPHI, or if you don't have LPHI do, you got to figure out somebody's going to do it if you agree with us that it should be done. We would love, of course, to have one set of expectations for all 5 parishes. The RFP does not require this. The RFP allows every parish to send in whatever you want around performance. You can be completely on board with this, or you can say you don't agree with any of it. We have no idea why the RFP would be unclear about this. Frankly, it's a question that I posed, but we're hoping for uniformity. Similarly, Judge, when we look at the impact outcomes, some of these would be the responsibility of the state. Some would be the responsibility of the locals, we're suggesting through LPHI. So, for example, how do we know that offenders receive more services? We look at the reentry accountability plan. That is qualitative. That's a local responsibility. How do we know that we have greater compliance? Well, number one, we look at violations and convictions. That's a state responsibility. But number two, because the locals are tracking the outcomes through discharge of individual offenders that you're working with, you know it too. So it's a collaborative between the state and the locals. We've managed in the set of recommendations to pinpoint which we think are the states, which we think are the locals, and then we'll work very, very closely with the Department of Corrections now. We're expecting through the funding that Wilson, United Way, and others have provided to us, we still got some time left, some hours left, some days left the next couple of months to get this clear so that by the time your contracts are cut, there's no question. Everybody signed up, one evaluation plan, state and locals. So I went further than your question, Judge, but did I answer it?
Yes, I understand.
Okay, other questions unmuted, if anyone has any, or comments? And remember the question of your giddiness or your mild impression. Will no one tell me you're giddy with excitement?
We are not giddy with excitement. I'm sorry.
Oh, Ty, I was going to ask you to, and here you are giddy. And Tristy, I know you're not giddy. So, all right, y'all. Listen, I know this is a lot. You know, as usual, these presentations, you're drinking through a fire hose. It takes some time. This is why we urge you to attend this conference that we're going to be giving you more detail on in terms of location and whatnot. Here on the screen, I show it August 14th, the afternoon, 1:30 to 3:30 in Baton Rouge. It will be available to you virtually. It will be available for you to come, and what you can't get virtually is much interaction. We want each of you to know what each of you are doing. We want to have the opportunity for you to interact to the degree that the 5 parishes are communicating, writing the same things in your comprehensive plans, in your RFPs. You will be uniform. You will be joined at the hip. You will form a movement and a collaborative approach that there will be no denying you. And so that's why we hope that meeting on the August 14th, which is nothing like this has ever happened yet. We hope we will get good participation from both Tier 1 and Tier 2 parishes. Tier 2 parishes don't have the deadlines as Tier 1 because there is no deadline for their comp plan to be done. But we want your comp plan to be done as soon as possible so we can help you achieve funding, even if the state is not going to provide you any. So with that, here is my contact information, which I think you all have. Let me see if there are any final questions or comments. Yes, it is possible, Victoria, to have the email sent to you, or I'm sorry, the PowerPoint sent to you. Easier, though, would be that it will be accessible on the SocialWorks website. Georgia, are you still with us?
Yes, sir, I am.
I'm going to ask you in a moment to give everyone that website information. This seminar has been recorded, so we will ask you, Georgia, to post both the PowerPoint and the recording on the website, and then we'll ask you to communicate this with everyone who's attended today, if not the entire 270 people who we invited. Can you do that, Georgia, and tell everyone what your website is?
Absolutely. The website is www.socialworks.org. It's socialworks.org/LaPrista. And on that page, there is pretty much everything that you will need. There's forms, there's educational pieces. I mean, it's really just a treasure trove of information and help that we've tried to put up there for everyone.
Can you say that? Can you tell us that website one more time slowly?
Yes, sir. www.socialworks.org/LaPrista. LAPRISTA.
When they go to socialworks.org, socialwork.org, there's going to be, if they go there, they can find LaPrista listed there as well, right?
Yes, on the homepage, if you just go to socialworks.org, on the homepage, there is a LaPrista link that you can click on the upper right-hand corner of that home screen.
And so I foolishly removed that website and the question and answer page. That's point 2 of me not being the brightest bulb on the tree. You see how you spell SocialWorks?
SocialWorks.
Okay, thank you for that. Any final questions or comments? If not, we will end 30 minutes early, which was my plan. So any final questions or comments? Well, thank all of you who are writing me your appreciation. I do appreciate that. And you've got my contact information. You've got any questions, you can certainly contact me. Go to the Social Work website, and we'll go from there. Thanks, everyone. Appreciate it. Thanks for all the hard work you're doing. It's exciting times. It's not easy. We'll do well this year. We'll do better next year. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Dennis.
Thank you all.